I'm Sabrina, 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my father called me a loser in front of 50 people at his Father's Day celebration. He didn't whisper it. He didn't pull me aside. He stood at the head of a mahogany table worth more than my annual salary, raised his crystal glass of Chateau Margaux, and announced to every relative, business partner, and Forbes journalist in attendance, "I'm proud of all my children, except the failure sitting at this table." Everyone laughed. My brother applauded. My stepmother smiled like she'd been waiting 27 years for that moment. But I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up, walked to my father, and placed a white envelope on his plate. "For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day." Then I left. When he opened that envelope, his scream echoed through the entire mansion. Before I tell you what was inside, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if this story resonates with you. And let me know in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it there? Now, let me take you back 2 months earlier. The day Aunt Ruth handed me a wooden box that my mother had kept hidden for 27 years. The Prescott estate sits on 12 acres in Brookline, Massachusetts, 4 stories of Georgian architecture, wrought iron gates, and a driveway lined with imported Italian cypress trees. Forbes featured it twice. Architectural Digest called it understated elegance. I called it a prison with really good landscaping. My father, Victor Prescott, built his real estate empire from the ground up. Or so he tells everyone at charity galas. The truth is messier, involving my mother's family land and connections he'd rather forget. But that's a story for later. Growing up, I learned quickly where I stood in the Prescott hierarchy. At the top, Marcus, my older brother. 35, groomed since birth to inherit the throne. He drives a Porsche 911 Turbo S and has never worn the same tie twice. Father's golden child, father's mirror image. Below him, Clarissa, my younger half-sister. 27, daughter of my stepmother Helena. Marketing director at Prescott Holdings, a title she earned by existing. She posts her Hermes bags on Instagram and calls it personal branding. And then there's me, Sabrina, the public school teacher. The one who drives a 10-year-old Honda Civic and buys her dresses at Nordstrom Rack. The one who chose helping children over making money, which in Prescott language translates to complete and utter disappointment. Every time I visit the estate, I park my car around the corner, behind the gardener's shed. Not because anyone told me to, but because the one time I parked in the circular driveway, Marcus laughed so hard he choked on his espresso. "Did you Uber here in that thing?" he'd asked. "Or is it a rental? Please tell me it's a rental." It wasn't a rental. It was the only thing I owned outright, and I was proud of it. But in that house, pride meant nothing unless it came with a price tag. The invitation came 3 weeks before Father's Day, delivered not by mail, but by Helena herself, via video call. My stepmother appeared on screen wearing a cream Chanel jacket and her signature Cartier love bracelet, the one Victor gave her on their 10th anniversary. Her smile was perfect, practiced. The kind of smile that made you feel like you were being interviewed rather than invited. "Sabrina, darling," she cooed. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." The pause before work was deliberate. It always was. "Not at all, Helena. What's up?" "Well, as you know, your father is receiving the Businessman of the Year award from the Boston Chamber of Commerce. We're hosting a celebration at the estate, very intimate, just family and a few close associates." She paused, letting the weight of intimate settle. "Naturally, we need you there." Naturally. Not want, need. "Press will be attending," she continued, adjusting an invisible strand of hair. "Forbes is sending a photographer. It's important that we present a unified family front." Ah, there it was. I wasn't being invited because they missed me. I was being invited because an empty chair would raise questions. Sabrina Prescott, the absent daughter, that would be a headline. Sabrina Prescott, standing quietly in the background while her father collected another trophy, that was just set dressing. "Of course," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I'll be there." "Wonderful." Her smile widened, but her eyes stayed cold. "Oh, and Sabrina? Do try to dress appropriately. Your father's reputation is on the line." The call ended before I could respond. I stared at my phone for a long moment, remembering all the other times Helena had reminded me to dress appropriately, to speak appropriately, to exist appropriately. She wasn't inviting me to a celebration. She was summoning me to perform. I should explain why I kept going back. When I was 10 years old, I won first place in my school's essay contest. The topic was my hero, and I wrote about my mother, how she used to read to me every night, how she smelled like jasmine and old books, how she told me I was her greatest gift. My mother had been dead for 5 years by then, but writing about her made her feel close again. I ran home clutching that certificate like it was made of gold. Father was in his study reviewing contracts. I burst through the door, breathless. "Daddy, I won! First place in the whole school!" He didn't look up from his laptop. "Writing?" he said. "And how much money does writing make, Sabrina?" I stood there, certificate wilting in my hands. I don't know. I just thought, "Marcus," he called out, "scored 2 goals in his soccer match today. That's the kind of achievement that matters. Teamwork, competition, winning." Marcus appeared in the doorway, 13 years old, and already wearing the smirk he'd perfect over the next 2 decades. "Yeah, little sis. Maybe stick to cheering from the sidelines." That night, I tore up my certificate and cried myself to sleep. But I remember one thing clearly. My grandmother, Victor's mother, found me afterward. She was the only warm presence in that cold house. She pulled me into her arms and whispered something I didn't understand at the time. "You look so much like your mother, sweetheart. So much like Eleanor." She said it like a secret, like a prayer. I didn't know then why those words carried such weight. I understand now. If the Prescott estate was a prison, Aunt Ruth's cottage in Vermont was its opposite. Ruth Bennett was my mother's younger sister, the only living connection I had to Eleanor Manning, the woman who gave birth to me and died when I was 5. While the Prescotts lived in marble and mahogany, Ruth lived in a small farmhouse surrounded by maple trees and towers of secondhand books. She'd been a librarian for 30 years. Her idea of luxury was a new reading lamp. I loved her fiercely. Every birthday, without fail, Ruth sent me a handwritten card. Not a text, not an email. A real card, with pressed flowers from her garden and words that made me feel seen. "Happy birthday to my favorite niece. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you're becoming." She was the only person who said my mother's name out loud. We talked on the phone every few weeks, me complaining about school administration, her recommending obscure novels I'd never heard of. Our conversations were easy, uncomplicated, nothing like the verbal landmines of Prescott family dinners. But there was always something Ruth held back. A hesitation in her voice when I mentioned Victor. A careful deflection when I asked about my mother's past. "One day," she'd say, "when you're ready, I have something to show you, something Eleanor wanted you to have." "Ready for what?" I'd ask. "You'll know." I never pushed. Ruth wasn't the type to withhold things without reason, and part of me, I think, was afraid of what I might find. But that fear was about to become irrelevant. Because 2 months before Father's Day, I drove to Vermont for spring break, and Ruth finally decided I was ready. But first, let me tell you about the Friday dinners. Every week, without exception, the Prescott family gathered around a 20-seat oak dining table imported from some chateau in France. Waterford crystal. Diptyque candles. Wine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. It should have felt elegant. Instead, it felt like a performance review. The ritual was always the same. Victor would sit at the head of the table, swirling his wine like a judge preparing to deliver verdicts. Helena would perch beside him, perfectly postured, monitoring everyone's behavior like a hawk in couture. And then the questioning would begin. "Marcus," Victor said at the last dinner before my Vermont trip, "tell me about the Henderson deal." Marcus straightened, preening. "Closed it yesterday, 5.2 million. They tried to lowball us, but I held firm." "That's my boy," Victor raised his glass. "To Marcus." "To Marcus," the table echoed. "Clarissa, how's the rebrand coming?" "Ahead of schedule." Clarissa flipped her hair. "The new campaign launches next month. Marketing Weekly wants to feature us." "Excellent." To Clarissa. To Clarissa. Then the table fell silent. Victor's gaze slid toward me. "Sabrina, He said my name like it was a chore. Anything to report? I set down my fork. Actually, yes. One of my students, a girl from a rough home situation, just got accepted to Boston University on a full scholarship. I've been tutoring her for 2 years. I expected something. A nod, a polite acknowledgement. Instead, Marcus snorted. And what do you get out of that? A gift card? Victor didn't even smile. So, nothing that benefits this family, as usual. Helena patted his arm. Don't be too hard on her, dear. Some people just aren't built for success. I gripped my napkin under the table and said nothing, because that's what I'd been trained to do. After dinner that night, I excused myself to use the restroom, the guest bathroom on the first floor, naturally, since Helena had made it clear years ago that family bathrooms were reserved for actual family. I was walking past the conservatory when I heard her voice. Helena was on the phone, her back to the doorway. She hadn't noticed me. Honestly, Patricia, it's exhausting, pretending to tolerate her every week. A pause, a laugh. No, she doesn't suspect anything. She's too desperate for Daddy's approval to see what's right in front of her face. I froze. The plan is simple, Helena continued. Victor's been itching to cut her off completely. He just needs a public reason, something that makes her look like the problem. Once she embarrasses herself badly enough, she'll leave on her own. No messy confrontation, no inheritance disputes, just gone. My heart pounded in my ears. The Father's Day event is perfect. All those people watching, all that pressure. If Victor pushes hard enough, she'll crack, and then we'll finally be rid of her. I pressed my back against the wall, barely breathing. Then the floorboard creaked beneath my foot. Helena spun around, our eyes met. For a split second, something flickered across her face. Alarm, calculation, recovery. Then she smiled, smooth as silk. Patricia, I'll call you back. She tucked her phone away. Sabrina, I didn't hear you there. I was just discussing a staffing issue at the company. Sounded serious, I managed. Nothing you need to worry about. Her smile sharpened. Run along now. I'm sure you have papers to grade or whatever it is you do. She brushed past me, leaving a trail of Chanel No. 5 and something far more poisonous. I stood in that hallway for a long time, Helena's words echoing in my skull. They weren't just dismissing me. They were planning my removal. The drive to Vermont took 4 hours, but it felt longer. Helena's voice kept replaying in my mind. Once she embarrasses herself badly enough, she'll leave on her own. Was that what 32 years had been building toward? A public humiliation designed to make me disappear? By the time I pulled into Ruth's gravel driveway, the sun was setting behind the mountains. Her cottage glowed warm and golden, smoke curling from the chimney. She was waiting on the porch with 2 cups of tea. You look like you've been carrying something heavy, she said, folding me into a hug. You have no idea. We sat by the fireplace that evening, surrounded by books and the smell of wood smoke. Ruth listened as I told her everything: the Friday dinners, Helena's phone call, the constant feeling of being an outsider in my own family. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Sabrina, she finally said, there's something I need to show you. She rose and walked to an old cedar chest in the corner of the room, one I'd seen 100 times but never thought to ask about. She lifted the lid and withdrew a wooden box, weathered with age, carved with delicate flowers. This belonged to your mother. My breath caught. Eleanor gave it to me before she died, Ruth continued, her voice thick. She made me promise to keep it safe, to give it to you when you were ready. Ready for what? Ruth pressed the box into my hands. For the truth. Inside, I found photographs of my mother as a young woman, radiant, laughing, full of life I'd never seen. Beneath them lay a leather journal, its pages yellowed and fragile, and at the very bottom, a sealed envelope. It was addressed in my mother's handwriting, for Sabrina, when she's strong enough. I don't know what's in that envelope, Ruth said softly. Eleanor never told me, but she was insistent. She said one day you'd need it. I held the envelope in my trembling hands, feeling its weight like a stone. 27 years of secrets, sealed in paper and silence. I wasn't sure I was ready, but I was starting to realize I might not have a choice. I didn't open the envelope that night. I couldn't. Instead, I tucked it back into the box and drove home to Boston, with it sitting on my passenger seat like a ticking bomb. Every red light, every traffic jam, I'd glance at it and wonder what my mother had been so desperate to tell me. But life, as it does, intervened. The week before Father's Day, Helena scheduled a family video call to coordinate logistics for the celebration. What that actually meant was making sure everyone looked perfect for the cameras. Victor's face filled my laptop screen like a tribunal judge. Helena hovered behind him. Clarissa waved from her corner, and Marcus smirked from what appeared to be his corner office. "The Forbes photographer arrives at 6, Victor announced. "Everyone should be dressed by 5:30. This is a black tie event. I expect you all to represent this family appropriately." His gaze landed on me. "Sabrina, that means you especially. No, teacher clothes." "I know how to dress myself, Father." "Do you?" Marcus chimed in. "I can send you something from Neiman's, my treat. Consider it charity." He laughed at his own joke. No one else did. "That won't be necessary," I said through clenched teeth. "Victor," Helena interjected sweetly, "perhaps you could give Sabrina a clothing allowance, just this once. We wouldn't want any unfortunate photos circulating." "No," I cut her off before Victor could respond. "I'll handle my own wardrobe, thank you." Victor sighed heavily, a sound he'd perfected over decades of disappointment. "You've always been stubborn, just like your mother." The words hit different now. Just like your mother. He'd said it 1,000 times before. I'd always assumed it was an insult. Victor's way of saying I was difficult, emotional, impractical. But sitting there with my mother's unopened envelope waiting at home, I heard something else underneath. Something that sounded almost like fear. That night, I dreamed of my mother. Not the vague impressions I usually carried, the jasmine perfume, the soft voice reading bedtime stories. This was a memory, sharp and clear, surfacing after decades of burial. I was 4 years old. My mother and I were in my bedroom, the one with the yellow curtains she'd sewn herself. She was brushing my hair, counting each stroke like she always did. 98, 99, 100. There, my beautiful girl. She wrapped her arms around me from behind, and we looked at our reflection in the mirror together. Her dark hair and my lighter brown, her warm eyes and my blue-gray ones. "Mama, why do I look different from Daddy?" She went still, just for a moment. "Because you look like me, sweetheart. And that's a good thing." "Does Daddy think it's a good thing?" She didn't answer right away. When she spoke again, her voice was fierce. "Listen to me, Sabrina. You are my greatest gift. No matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does, you are loved, you are wanted, you are enough. But Daddy, your Daddy will learn." She held me tighter. "I'll make sure of it." Footsteps in the hallway. We both looked up. Victor stood in the doorway, watching us with an expression I was too young to read. My mother met his gaze, didn't flinch. "She's our daughter," she said. "Ours." Victor said nothing. He simply turned and walked away. 1 year later, my mother was dead. A car accident on a rainy night. The police said she lost control on a curve. I was 5 years old when they buried her. 27 years later, I woke up in my Boston apartment with tears on my face and a realization settling into my bones. My mother had been protecting me from something, and whatever it was, she'd taken it to her grave, until now. The day of the Father's Day celebration arrived with the kind of perfect weather that felt like a cosmic joke. Blue skies, 72 degrees, not a cloud in sight. The Prescott estate had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. White tents dotted the back lawn. A jazz quartet played beneath the pergola. Waitstaff in crisp uniforms circulated with silver trays of champagne and canapes. And flowers. Flowers everywhere. Roses, peonies, orchids. Helena's signature touch, designed to remind everyone that elegance could be purchased by the truckload. I arrived at exactly 5:30, as instructed, wearing a simple black dress I'd found at Nordstrom Rack for 60% off. It wasn't designer. It wasn't remarkable. But it fit well, and more importantly, it was mine. Helena intercepted me at the door. "Oh, Sabrina." Her eyes swept over me with surgical precision. You actually came. Was there doubt? One never knows with you. She adjusted my collar like I was a child. At least you made an effort. Try to stay in the background during photos, won't you? The lighting is better for certain complexions. I bit back a response and stepped inside. The grand dining room had been set for 50 guests. The mahogany table, normally oppressive, now stretched the length of the room, draped in white linen and anchored by towering floral centerpieces. Place cards in calligraphy. Waterford crystal at every setting. A Steinway grand piano in the corner, waiting for the hired performer. And at the head of the table, a throne-like chair reserved for the guest of honor. Victor Prescott, Businessman of the Year. I found my place card near the far end, between a distant cousin I barely knew and the empty chair reserved for late arrivals. As far from Victor as possible. Some things never changed. By 7 o'clock, all 50 seats were filled. I recognized most of the faces, aunts, uncles, cousins twice removed. The Prescott family tree was vast and complicated, held together less by affection than by shared interest in Victor's success. They came for the free champagne and the networking opportunities. Love was optional. Mixed among them were Victor's business associates, men in bespoke suits and women in designer gowns, all laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. And in the corner, a photographer from Forbes, documenting everything for the puff piece that would undoubtedly call Victor a visionary. The evening progressed like a carefully orchestrated performance. Appetizers, toasts, anecdotes about Victor's early struggles that conveniently omitted my mother's family money. Helena played the gracious hostess, gliding between tables with practiced ease. Marcus held court near the bar. Clarissa posed for the photographer like she was auditioning for a magazine cover, and I sat in my corner, speaking only when spoken to. Then came the main event. Victor rose from his chair, crystal glass in hand, and the room fell silent. He was wearing a charcoal Brioni suit, a Patek Philippe gleaming on his wrist. His silver hair was immaculate. His smile was camera-ready. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "This award means a great deal to me, not because of what it represents professionally, but because of the people who made it possible." He gestured to Helena. "My beautiful wife, who stands by me through everything." Applause. "My son Marcus, who will carry on the Prescott legacy." More applause. Marcus raised his glass. "My daughter Clarissa, who brings grace and ambition to everything she does." Clarissa beamed. Helena dabbed at fake tears. "And of course—" Victor paused, his gaze sweeping the room until it landed on me. "I am proud of all my children." Another pause, longer this time. "Except the loser sitting at this table." The words dropped like a bomb. For one heartbeat, the room was frozen. Then someone laughed. Then another. Then Marcus was applauding, slow and deliberate. "About time you said it, Dad." Helena pressed her lips together, suppressing a smile. 50 pairs of eyes turned to me, and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. I didn't cry. I know that's what they expected, what they wanted. Sabrina, the sensitive one. Sabrina, the emotional one. Sabrina, who would flee in tears and prove once and for all that she didn't belong. But something had shifted in me. Maybe it was my mother's letter, still unopened in my purse. Maybe it was Helena's words from weeks ago, echoing in my skull. She'll leave on her own. Maybe it was 32 years of swallowing insults finally reaching critical mass. Whatever it was, I didn't cry. Instead, I stood up. The laughter died. The room went silent again, this time with confusion. I wasn't following the script. Slowly, deliberately, I walked toward the head of the table. My heels clicked against the marble floor. The Forbes photographer raised his camera, sensing something newsworthy. Victor watched me approach, his smirk faltering slightly. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer. I reached into my purse and withdrew a white envelope. Plain, unremarkable, but heavy with everything I'd discovered in the past 2 months. I placed it gently on his plate, beside his untouched dessert. "For you, Dad." My voice was steady, clear. "Happy Father's Day." Victor stared at the envelope like it might bite him. "What is this? One of your sentimental cards?" Open it and see. Helena leaned forward. Victor, don't engage with her theatrics. Open it. Our eyes met. For the first time in my life, I didn't look away first. Something flickered across his face. Uncertainty, maybe even fear. But I didn't stay to watch. I turned and walked toward the door. 50 guests parted to let me through, too stunned to speak. Sabrina! Victor's voice cracked. Get back here! You don't walk away from me! I paused at the threshold, didn't turn around. I just did. And then I was gone. Let me take you back 3 weeks. After that video call, the one where Victor told me not to dress like a teacher, I finally found the courage to open my mother's envelope. I sat on my apartment floor with the wooden box beside me, Ruth's words echoing, "For the truth." My hands trembled as I broke the seal. Inside were 2 documents and a letter written in my mother's handwriting. I read the letter first. My dearest Sabrina, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there to protect you, and I'm so sorry. There's something I should have told you while I was alive, but I was too afraid. Afraid of losing you, afraid of what Victor would do. The truth is, Victor is not your biological father. Before I met him, I was in love with someone else, a man named James Whitfield. He was kind and gentle, and he loved me completely. We were going to be married. But James died in an accident 2 months before our wedding, and I discovered I was pregnant with you shortly after. My family was devastated. A child out of wedlock would have ruined our reputation. So when Victor proposed, he needed our family's land for his developments. My parents saw a solution. Victor agreed to marry me and adopt you legally in exchange for the property rights. It was a business transaction. He promised he would treat you as his own. He lied. I spent every day of our marriage watching him resent you for existing, and I couldn't stop it. I tried, Sabrina. God, I tried, but he was too powerful, and I was too weak. I'm enclosing your adoption certificate, proof that you are not Victor's biological daughter. Keep it safe. One day, you may need it. Know this, you were created from love, real love. James would have adored you, and I love you more than my own life. You are not a mistake. You are my miracle. Forever yours, Mama. I sat there for an hour, letter clutched to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, tears of release. For 32 years, I'd tried to earn the love of a man who had never intended to give it, and now I understood why. The letter was one thing, legal proof was another. The next morning, I called Daniel Hartley, my closest colleague at school. We'd been friends for 3 years. The kind of friend who shows up with coffee when you're grading papers at midnight, who listens without judgment, who never once made me feel like a failure. I need your help, I told him, and I need you to keep it confidential. Anything. I explained everything. My mother's letter, the adoption certificate, 27 years of unexplained coldness from a man I'd spent my whole life trying to impress. Daniel didn't hesitate. What do you need? A DNA test, to confirm it. Getting Victor's sample was easier than I expected. At one of the Friday dinners, he'd left his jacket draped over a chair. Before I left, I pulled a few hairs from the collar, strands with the follicles still attached. Legally, it was gray area. Ethically, I was past caring. The testing facility was AABB accredited, the gold standard for paternity testing. Results in 2 weeks. 14 days felt like 14 years. When the email finally arrived, I was sitting in my classroom after hours, surrounded by student essays. My hands shook as I clicked open the PDF. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Conclusion. The alleged father is excluded as the biological parent. 0%. Not a doubt, not a possibility. 0. I sat there in the empty classroom, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and started to laugh. All those years, all that desperate striving, all those moments I'd thought, if I just try harder, he'll finally love me. He was never going to love me, not because I wasn't good enough, because I was never his to love. Daniel found me still sitting there an hour later, the test results printed and clutched in my hands. You okay? He asked quietly. I looked up at him with wet eyes and the first real smile I'd felt in weeks. I'm better than I've been in 32 years. That night, alone in my apartment, I finally let myself fall apart. I sat on my bedroom floor with my mother's photograph in my hands, the one from Ruth's box, where Eleanor was laughing in a summer dress, her whole life ahead of her. She couldn't have been more than 23. "You knew," I whispered to her image. "You knew he would never accept me. And you tried to protect me anyway." For the first time, I understood the sadness I'd always sensed beneath her smiles. The way she'd hold me a little too tight, the fierce, almost desperate way she'd tell me I was loved. She knew her time was running out, and she was trying to give me enough love to last a lifetime. I cried for her that night, for the life she should have had with James Whitfield, for the marriage she'd been trapped in with a man who resented her child, for the accident that took her too soon, leaving me defenseless. But somewhere in the grief, something else emerged. Freedom. For 32 years, I'd carried Victor's rejection like a weight around my neck. I'd believed his coldness was my fault, that if I'd been smarter, more successful, more like Marcus, maybe he would have loved me. But the truth was simpler and more brutal. I was never going to win a game I didn't know I was playing. I looked at the adoption papers, the DNA results. My mother's letter. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want Victor's money. I didn't want his approval anymore. I just wanted to stop pretending. I wanted the truth to be spoken, out loud, in the same room where I'd been humiliated for decades. And I wanted to walk away, not as a failure fleeing in shame, but as a woman who finally knew her own worth. "I don't owe them anything," I said to the empty room. And for the first time, I believed it. If you're still here, maybe you know what this feels like. That moment when you realize you've been chasing someone's approval your whole life, and they were never going to give it. Not because you weren't good enough, but because they'd already decided you weren't worthy before you ever had a chance to prove yourself. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family? Someone who made you feel like you'd never measure up? Drop a comment and tell me your story. And if you want to know what happened when my father opened that envelope, keep watching. Because his scream could be heard through the entire house. Before I could confront Victor, I needed one more piece of confirmation. Aunt Ruth gave me a name, Walter Green. "He was the lawyer who handled your mother's affairs," she explained over the phone, "and the adoption paperwork. If anyone can verify what those documents mean, it's him." Walter Green was 72 years old, retired for 5 years, living in a modest colonial in Wellesley. When I called and explained who I was, he went quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor's daughter," he finally said, his voice heavy with something that sounded like regret. "I've been waiting for this call for a long time." We met at his home office, surrounded by shelves of leather-bound legal books and framed photographs of grandchildren. He moved slowly, but his mind was sharp as a tack. I showed him the adoption certificate, the DNA results, my mother's letter. He read each document carefully, then removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "It's all legitimate," he said. "I drafted that adoption agreement myself 32 years ago. Victor signed it in my office." So he knew from the very beginning. He knew before the wedding. Walter's voice was bitter. "Your mother was upfront about her pregnancy. She offered to release him from the engagement. But Victor saw an opportunity. Her family's land was worth millions. He agreed to adopt you in exchange for the property rights. And the condition? That he would raise you as his own." Walter shook his head, but I watched over the years. I saw how he treated you at family events. How your mother would call me crying, asking if there was any legal recourse. She was trapped. We both were. I let that sink in. "Would you be willing to confirm this, if it ever came to that?" Walter met my eyes. "I'm 72 years old, Miss Prescott. I'm not afraid of Victor anymore. I should have spoken up decades ago." He reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. "Your mother would be so proud of you." The week before Father's Day, Daniel came over to help me prepare. Not prepare for revenge, I want to be clear about that. I wasn't planning some elaborate takedown. I wasn't trying to destroy Victor's business or steal his money or ruin his family. I just wanted to stop lying. "So what's the plan?" Daniel asked, spreading documents across my kitchen table. I looked at the evidence, the DNA results, a copy of the adoption certificate, and a letter I'd written myself. Short, direct, no accusations, just facts. "Dad, I'm not your biological daughter. You've known this since before I was born. Mom's letter explains everything, and the DNA test confirms it." Thank you for providing a roof over my head for 18 years. But I don't owe you gratitude for treating me like a burden I never asked to be. I'm not looking for your money or your inheritance. I release any claim to the Prescott estate. I just wanted you to know that I know, and that I'm done pretending. Sabrina Daniel read the letter twice. That's it? No, you're a monster? No rotten hell? That's not who I want to be. But after everything he's done… Exactly. I took the letter back, folding it carefully. He spent 32 years trying to make me feel small. If I stoop to his level, he wins. But if I walk away with my dignity intact, knowing the truth, that's something he can never take from me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, soft and sad. You know they'll never forgive you for this. They never forgave me for being born. I slid the documents into a white envelope. At least now they'll have an actual reason. I sealed the envelope and wrote on the front, for Dad. No return address, no room for reconciliation. Just the truth, finally spoken. The night before the party, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. Victor opening the envelope in private, Victor opening it publicly, Victor throwing it away unread. But I kept coming back to the same conclusion. It didn't matter what he did. My peace wasn't dependent on his reaction anymore. I got up and walked to my dresser where my mother's photograph sat beside a small vase of jasmine, her favorite flower. I'd started buying it weekly, a ritual that made me feel close to her. Hey, Mama, I whispered to the photo. Tomorrow's the day. Silence, obviously. But I could almost hear her voice, the way she used to speak to me before bed. You are enough, sweetheart. Exactly as you are. I thought about what she'd sacrificed, marrying a man she didn't love to protect her child, spending years in a cold marriage, watching helplessly as Victor directed his resentment at an innocent girl, dying before she could see her daughter grow up. She deserved better than Victor Prescott, and so did I. I picked up the envelope from my nightstand, felt its weight in my hands. If he's cruel tomorrow, and he probably will be, it won't hurt me anymore, I said out loud. Because I know the truth now. I know who I am, and it has nothing to do with him. The jasmine swayed gently in the breeze from my open window. I tucked the envelope into my purse, climbed back into bed, and for the first time in weeks, slept deeply and dreamlessly. When I woke the next morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Ready. Not for battle, not for revenge, just ready to finally be free. Now let me take you back to the dining room, to the moment after I walked out. Victor sat frozen at the head of the table, the white envelope lying on his plate like a dare. What the hell was that about? Marcus laughed nervously, trying to break the tension. Classic Sabrina, always so dramatic. But Victor wasn't laughing. His hand reached for the envelope slowly, almost reluctantly. Helena leaned over his shoulder, curiosity overriding her usual composure. It's probably nothing, she said. Some passive-aggressive thank you note. Victor tore the envelope open. The first page slid out. The DNA test results. His eyes scanned the document, and I'm told, by a cousin who was sitting nearby, that all the color drained from his face in about 3 seconds. Victor? Helena's voice sharpened. What is it? He didn't answer. His hands were shaking as he pulled out the second document, the adoption certificate, his own signature, dated 32 years ago. Victor! The third document was my letter. He read it in silence, his jaw clenching tighter with each line, and then, according to my cousin, Victor Prescott, the unshakable patriarch, the self-made billionaire, the man who had never shown an ounce of vulnerability in his entire life. He screamed, No, 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 no! The glass of Chateau Margaux shattered against the table. Red wine spread across the white linen like blood. Victor, what is happening? Helena grabbed the papers from his hands, her eyes darting across the text. DNA results? Probability of paternity 0%? What is this? Her voice was loud enough that the people closest to them heard every word. And in a room full of gossips, that was all it took. The whispers started immediately. DNA test? 0%? Sabrina isn't his daughter? Victor was clutching the edge of the table like a drowning man, mumbling, "This can't be right," over and over. The Forbes photographer was capturing everything. and somewhere in the parking lot, I was climbing into my Honda Civic, hands steady on the wheel, heart pounding with something that wasn't quite triumph. It was relief. Helena, for all her cunning, made a fatal mistake in that moment. She panicked out loud. Adoption certificate? She was still staring at the papers, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent room. Victor, you adopted Sabrina? She's not your biological child? 50 guests heard every word. To Helena's credit, she realized her error almost immediately. But it was too late. The information was already spreading through the room like wildfire. Did she say Sabrina isn't his daughter? He adopted her? But he's been treating her like garbage for years. If she's not even his kid, why was he so cruel? Victor finally found his voice. Everyone, this is a private family matter. Private? Aunt Margaret, my father's older sister, a formidable woman in her 70s who had never liked Helena, rose from her seat. You just called that girl a loser in front of everyone. Now we find out she's not even your daughter, and this is private? Margaret, sit down. I will not sit down. Margaret's voice could have cut glass. Eleanor was like a daughter to me. I watched how you treated her child after she died. We all did. We just didn't have proof that it was deliberate. The room erupted. Cousins whispered furiously. Business associates exchanged uncomfortable glances. The photographer from Forbes, I later learned, was furiously texting his editor. Victor, one of his business partners, a man named Howard Chen, stood up with visible discomfort. I think perhaps I should be going. Howard, don't be ridiculous. I came here to celebrate your award, not to witness. He gestured vaguely at the chaos. Whatever this is, I'll call you next week. He left. 2 other associates followed. Marcus was on his feet trying to control the damage. Everyone, please. My father is clearly upset. Let's just take a breath. Marcus, Helena's voice was icy. Not now. But Marcus kept talking, and Helena kept snapping, and Victor kept clutching the adoption papers like they might burst into flames if he held them tightly enough. Meanwhile, the truth kept spreading, and there was nothing any of them could do to stop it. What happened next, I pieced together later from Aunt Margaret's account. The room had descended into chaos, controlled chaos, the kind that happens at wealthy gatherings where no one raises their voice, but everyone is absolutely furious. Margaret stood at the center of it, commanding attention the way only a 73-year-old Prescott matriarch could. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, her voice cut through the murmurs. Victor, you married Eleanor knowing she was pregnant with another man's child. You legally adopted Sabrina, and then you spent 30 years punishing that little girl for circumstances beyond her control? Margaret, you don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. She took a step closer to him. I was at your wedding. I watched Eleanor's face when she said her vows. She wasn't in love with you, Victor. She was terrified. And now I understand why. Another cousin chimed in. Robert, who had always seemed to worship Victor. Is this true? You knew from the beginning? This is none of your business. It became our business when you made your announcement. Robert's voice was cold. We all laughed. I laughed. At a woman who never did anything to deserve it. The mood in the room had shifted palpably. These weren't strangers accusing Victor, they were family. People who had witnessed years of subtle cruelty and explained it away. People who were now realizing they had been complicit. You made us all part of your vendetta, Margaret continued. Every joke at Sabrina's expense, every dismissive comment. You wanted us to look down on her, and we did, because we trusted you. Victor's face had gone from pale to mottled red. I gave that girl everything. Everything except basic human decency. The silence that followed was deafening, and somewhere across town, I was pulling into my apartment parking lot, finally able to breathe. According to Margaret, the most devastating moments came from Victor's own children. Marcus was the first to crack. He'd been pacing behind his father trying to manage the situation when the full weight of the revelation finally hit him. He stopped mid-stride, staring at the adoption papers still clutched in Victor's hand. Wait. His voice was strange, hollow. Wait, wait, wait. Marcus? Victor reached for him. You knew. Marcus stepped back. My whole life, you told me Sabrina was a disappointment, that she wasn't living up to the Prescott name. That I had to work harder because she was dragging us down. Son, but she was never a Prescott. Marcus's voice broke. She was just some kid you agreed to raise for a land deal. And you made me hate her for it. I didn't make you. You did. Marcus's composure finally shattered. Every time I mocked her, you laughed. Every time I excluded her, you approved. I thought I was being a good son, but I was just a weapon. Clarissa was crying now, mascara streaming down her carefully contoured cheeks. Mom? She turned to Helena. Did you know about this? Helena's silence was answer enough. You told me Sabrina was jealous of us, that she hated me because I had what she wanted, but she never wanted anything except, Clarissa's voice broke, except to be part of the family. Clarissa, darling, it's more complicated than… No, it's not. Clarissa pulled away from Helena's outstretched hand. It's really not complicated at all. You're horrible people. And you raised me to be horrible too. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Helena called after her. To find my sister. The door slammed behind her, leaving a silence so complete you could hear the ice melting in the abandoned champagne glasses. But Margaret wasn't finished. I learned later that she'd been waiting decades for this moment, not out of malice, but out of a guilt that had never quite faded. She'd known Eleanor, loved her like a sister, and she'd watched, helpless, as Victor slowly crushed the light out of her. Since we're laying bare family secrets, Margaret said, her voice carrying across the devastated room, let me add one more. Victor's head snapped up. Margaret, don't! Eleanor didn't die in an accident. The room went completely still. She lost control of her car on a rainy night, that's true. But do you know why she was driving at midnight in a storm, Victor? No answer. Because you told her you were going to send Sabrina away, to boarding school. You said you couldn't stand looking at another man's child anymore. Gasps rippled through the room. Eleanor was driving to her sister's house, to Ruth, to beg her to take Sabrina in. She was going to leave you. Finally, after years of threats and manipulation, she'd had enough. You don't know that. I know because she called me that night. Margaret's voice trembled. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She said, Margaret, he's going to take my baby away. I can't let him. I'd rather die than let him hurt her anymore. The room was frozen. And then her car went off the road. Margaret wiped her eyes. She didn't lose control, Victor. She lost hope. Victor looked like he'd been struck. Eleanor spent 8 years in a loveless marriage, protecting a daughter you never wanted. She was 29 years old when she died, and the last words she ever said to anyone were about keeping Sabrina safe. That's not fair. Fair? Margaret's voice rose for the first time. You want to talk about fair? That little girl grew up motherless in a house full of people who resented her existence. You don't get to talk about fair. Victor opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time in his life, Victor Prescott had nothing to say. The aftermath of Margaret's revelation was unlike anything the Prescott family had ever witnessed. Marcus, who had spent his entire life modeling himself after Victor, looked like a man watching his identity crumble. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. I called her a charity case. The words came out broken, barely audible. At Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, in front of everyone, I said, at least we know one person at this table didn't earn their place here. Everyone laughed. Sabrina just smiled, like she was used to it. He looked up, tears streaming down his face. She was used to it, because I did it all the time, because you made me think it was okay. Victor said nothing. I'm 35 years old. Marcus's voice cracked. And I've been a bully my entire adult life. To my own sister, who wasn't even technically my sister, who never did anything to me except exist. Marcus, you couldn't have known. I didn't want to know. He stood abruptly, chair scraping against the marble floor. I didn't ask questions because the answers might have made me uncomfortable. That's not ignorance, Dad. That's cowardice. He turned to Helena, who had been standing frozen. Her perfect composure finally cracked. And you orchestrated this. You told me Sabrina was beneath us. You coached me on exactly what to say to make her feel small. I was protecting this family. You were protecting your inheritance. Marcus's disgust was palpable. This was never about family. This was about money. It's always been about money with you. He looked at his father one last time. I don't know who I am anymore, but I know I don't want to be you. Marcus walked out of the dining room without another word, and Victor, for the first time anyone could remember, looked truly alone. Victor made one last attempt to salvage the evening. He straightened his Brioni jacket, smoothed his silver hair, summoned the commanding presence that had built a real estate empire and intimidated boardrooms for 40 years. Everyone. His voice was firm, controlled. This is a family matter. I appreciate your concern, but I must ask you to respect our privacy. Let's end the evening here, and I'll address these allegations appropriately. No one moved. I said, the evening is over. Victor. It was Howard Chen's voice, coming through the speakerphone his assistant had left on the table. He must have been listening from his car. I'm withdrawing from the Meridian project. My attorneys will contact yours Monday morning. Howard, be reasonable. I just watched you call your own daughter, adopted or not, a loser in front of 50 people. Then I learned you've been psychologically abusing her for 30 years. What exactly is reasonable about continuing to do business with you? The line went dead. Before Victor could respond, 2 more phones buzzed. Text messages, emails. The dominoes were falling. Mr. Prescott? The Forbes photographer stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable. I think you should know. My editor just asked me to pivot the article. We'll be reaching out for comment before publication. Victor's face went gray. Get out! His voice was barely a whisper. All of you, get out of my house! Slowly the guests began to disperse, not with the satisfied air of people who'd attended a celebration, but with the shell-shocked expressions of witnesses to a catastrophe. Margaret lingered at the door. She looked at Victor one last time. Eleanor deserved better, she said quietly, and so did Sabrina. Then she was gone. And Victor Prescott stood alone in his ruined dining room, surrounded by shattered glass and spilled wine and the wreckage of a reputation built on lies. You know, sitting here now, I realize something important. I didn't destroy my father. I didn't bring down his empire, or steal his money, or ruin his marriage. I just told the truth. The truth has a funny way of doing the rest. If you've ever been in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and speaking up, I see you. I know how hard that choice is, and I know that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply stop pretending. What happened after that night? Did I see Victor again? Did I forgive Helena? Stay with me. We're almost at the end. While the Prescott estate imploded, I drove home in silence. No radio, no podcasts, just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my breathing. I pulled into my apartment complex, a modest building in Somerville, nothing fancy but mine, and sat in the parking lot for a long time. My phone buzzed. Text from Victor. How dare you, call me immediately. Text from Marcus. Sabrina, please, we need to talk. Text from Helena. You've destroyed this family. I hope you're happy. And then, finally, a text from Aunt Ruth. Margaret called me. She told me everything. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. I deleted the first 3 messages without responding. But Ruth's, that one I saved. Inside my apartment, I walked straight to my dresser and picked up my mother's photograph. It's over, Mama. My voice came out steadier than I expected. I'm free. I knew there would be fallout, legal complications maybe, angry phone calls definitely. The Prescotts weren't the type to accept humiliation quietly, but in that moment, none of it mattered. My phone rang again, Victor's number. I let it go to voicemail, then Marcus's number, voicemail, then a number I didn't recognize. I answered that one. Sabrina? It was Clarissa, her voice thick with tears. I know you probably don't want to talk to me, but I had to say, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I sat down on my bed, phone pressed to my ear. Where are you? In my car, outside your building. A pause. I know you need space. I know I don't deserve anything from you, but if there's ever a chance, if you're ever willing to talk. I looked out my window. Sure enough, a white BMW was parked across the street. Come upstairs, Clarissa. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. 1 week later, The consequences became concrete. The Forbes article never mentioned Victor's award. Instead, it ran a piece titled, "The Prescott Family's Carefully Constructed Image Shatters at Father's Day Celebration." The details were damning but accurate. The public humiliation, the DNA revelation, the subsequent exodus of business partners. Howard Chen officially withdrew from the Meridian project, a $70 million development that had been Victor's crown jewel. Two other partners followed within days, citing concerns about corporate leadership. Helena filed for legal separation. Not because she'd suddenly developed a conscience, but because, as Marcus bitterly explained, she knew the money was about to dry up and wanted to secure her share before things got worse. Marcus resigned as COO of Prescott Holdings. His resignation letter, which somehow leaked to Boston Business Journal, contained a single sentence: "I need to learn who I am when I'm not trying to be my father." And me? I went back to work. I graded papers. I coached students through college applications. I ate lunch with Daniel in the teacher's lounge and talked about everything except the Prescott family drama. But things had changed. My cousin Robert, the one who'd laughed at Victor's loser joke, sent me flowers with a card that simply said, "I'm sorry." Aunt Margaret called every few days to check on me, sharing updates I hadn't asked for but appreciated anyway. And Clarissa. Clarissa called every single day. "Can we get coffee?" she asked on day 7. "Not at a restaurant your family owns." "There's a diner near my apartment. Nothing fancy, just coffee." I hesitated. A week ago, I would have said no, but something had shifted in me too. I wasn't the woman who flinched at Prescott judgment anymore. "Fine," I said, "but I'm buying." Deal. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was something new. The diner Clarissa chose was exactly what she promised. Nothing fancy. Formica tables, vinyl booths, a waitress who called everyone hun, and refilled coffee without being asked. The kind of place Helena would never set foot in, which is probably why Clarissa picked it. She was already there when I arrived, hunched over a cup of black coffee like it was a lifeline. Without her usual designer armor, the Hermes bags, the perfect makeup, she looked younger, smaller. "Hey," I said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Hey." She couldn't meet my eyes. "Thanks for coming." We sat in silence for a moment, the clatter of dishes and murmur of other conversations filling the space. Finally, Clarissa spoke. "I've been replaying every conversation we've ever had, every time I made you feel like you weren't good enough, every time I compared myself to you and made sure you knew I thought I was winning." "Clarissa, no, let me finish." She looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "I was 27 years old before I realized I'd never actually had a relationship with my own sister. I just had a competition, and I didn't even know what I was competing for." "Neither did I admitted. "I thought if I tried hard enough, eventually I'd be part of the family." "You were always part of the family. We just—" She swallowed hard. "We were too busy performing to notice." I stirred my coffee, processing. "Can we start over?" Clarissa asked, her voice small. "I know I don't deserve it. I know you might never trust me, but can we try?" I thought about my mother, about chosen family, about the difference between blood and belonging. "We can't erase 27 years of damage with one coffee," I said finally. "But we can start somewhere." Clarissa nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a door, cracked open, and sometimes that's enough. 1 month after the Father's Day disaster, I drove to a cemetery in Vermont. Aunt Ruth came with me. We walked together through rows of granite headstones until we reached a modest marker beneath an old oak tree. The stone read, "Eleanor Grace Manning, beloved mother and sister, 1969 to 2002. You are enough, exactly as you are." I'd chosen that inscription myself, when I was old enough to have an opinion. At the time, I didn't know why those words felt so important. Now I understood. I knelt in the damp grass and placed a bouquet of sunflowers against the stone, her favorite, Ruth had told me years ago. "Hey, Mama." My voice was barely above a whisper. "I found your letter. I know everything now." The autumn wind rustled through the oak leaves above us. I spent 32 years trying to earn love from a man who was never going to give it. But you knew that, didn't you? You tried to protect me, and you're still protecting me, even now. Ruth placed a hand on my shoulder, steady and warm. I'm not a Prescott, I continued. I never was. But I'm your daughter, Eleanor Manning's daughter, and that's more than enough. I stood, brushing grass from my knees. I'm going to be okay, Mama. For the first time in my life, I really believe that. We stayed for a while longer, Ruth sharing stories about Eleanor as a young woman, her laughter, her stubbornness, her fierce love for books and flowers, and the daughter she'd barely gotten to raise. When we finally walked back to the car, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the absence of pain. The pain was still there, and might always be, but beneath it now a solid foundation of truth. I knew who I was, I knew where I came from, and I knew, finally, completely, that my worth had never depended on Victor Prescott's approval. You okay? Ruth asked as we pulled out of the cemetery. I smiled at her, the first real smile in a long time. Yeah, I said. I think I finally am. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever worked yourself to exhaustion trying to earn love that was never on the table, I want you to know something. Your worth is not determined by people who refuse to see it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, and sometimes walking away is just the first step toward walking toward yourself. If this story touched you, please hit like and subscribe, and check the description below for more stories like this one, stories of people who found their voice when they thought they'd lost it forever. Until next time, take care of yourselves, and remember, you are enough, exactly as you are.